It was late spring, and the city felt alive with the promise of something new. Street musicians played their tunes on every other corner, and the warm air carried the scent of fresh pastries from a nearby bakery. In that softly lit atmosphere, a gentle soul named Andrew found himself sipping tea in a small cafe near the river. He had just discovered that his savings were almost gone, and the rent was due in a matter of days. Normally, he'd try not to panic, but something about this evening left him both anxious and hopeful. He stared at the steaming cup in his hands and wondered how he would get back on his feet. It was one of those nights when he felt as though the universe was either about to collapse around him or finally offer him a break. He had no idea that a single unexpected conversation, a single glance shared across the room would begin to unravel the knots in his life. He noticed her at a table by the window, browsing through a worn-out book with soft green covers. The light from the overhead lamp caught the hint of gold in her hair, and the faintest smile played across her face whenever she found something interesting on the pages. Andrew couldn't help but glance in her direction now and then, hoping she wouldn't spot his curiosity. His mind was so full of worries about his finances, credit card bills piling up, a loan he couldn't seem to repay on time, that he almost didn't trust himself to make small talk. Yet a quiet part of him insisted that speaking to her was exactly what he needed to take his mind off the panic swirling inside. He finished his tea, drew in a breath, and approached her table with a cautious sort of bravery. The moment she looked up, their eyes met, and Andrew felt a wave of calm wash over him. Her name was Claire, and she invited him to sit with a sincerity that warmed him, as if they were old friends who simply hadn't seen each other in ages. He wasn't sure how it happened, but in a matter of minutes, the conversation flowed so naturally that he forgot about being nervous. They talked about everything from the best local music venues to the simple pleasure of sipping tea on a quiet night. He found out she was an artist, painting abstracts that mirrored her emotions and experiences, although she rarely showed her work to anyone but close friends. Andrew confessed that he was trying to find stability after losing a well-paying job in marketing a few months back. He had jumped from one freelance gig to another, but for some reason he couldn't keep up with the ever-growing list of bills. Claire listened with genuine interest, leaning forward, her elbows on the table as she gently asked about his struggles. Andrew felt oddly safe in her presence, as though opening up about his financial stress might not only be okay, it might be exactly what he needed. She didn't shower him with cliched pep talks or act uncomfortable. Instead, she offered practical empathy, the kind where someone says they're sorry you're hurting, but also believes you have what it takes to figure things out. Her eyes shone with quiet compassion, and Andrew felt a kind of tenderness that he hadn't experienced in years. Before he knew it, they were laughing at silly jokes, discussing ideas for new creative projects, and exchanging phone numbers with the promise of meeting again soon. He walked away that night with a lighter heart, even though his bank account was still near empty. Over the next week, they messaged each other often, little notes about how the day was going, funny thoughts they had, and even random pictures of interesting sights around town. Andrew felt more connected than he had in ages, yet the deadline for his rent kept looming, and each time he looked at his dwindling funds, he felt a wave of dread. He knew he couldn't rely on chance alone. He had to find a plan. Late at night, Andrew would sit on his small couch with a laptop and browse countless job postings, searching for something steady. But stable work seemed like an impossible dream in that moment. Every posting he saw required either more experience than he had or paid far too little to cover basic expenses. The anxiety followed him everywhere. One weekend afternoon, Claire invited him to her makeshift studio, which was actually just the living room of her tiny apartment. Canvases leaned against walls. Half-finished works crowded every surface, and the faint smell of paint and turpentine clung to the air. She poured them both glasses of iced tea, and as they settled on a worn-out rug, she gently asked him about his situation. Andrew shrugged, feeling the old embarrassment rise up in his chest. It was hard admitting that he felt stuck and scared, that he was slipping into debt without a clear idea of how to stop. But Claire simply nodded, listened, and asked if he'd ever considered merging his marketing background with her creative world. She mentioned that some of her painter friends were desperate to promote their art but had no idea how to reach the right audience. Meanwhile, Andrew knew a thing or two about online campaigns and social media strategies. A tiny spark flickered in his mind. He remembered how, at his previous job, he had handled campaigns for local brands, helping them spread the word about new products or events. Maybe he could adapt those skills for artists. Sure, he'd never done marketing for the art world specifically, but the fundamentals were the same. Define the audience, figure out the best messaging, and choose platforms that fit. Andrew felt a burst of excitement just imagining the possibilities. If he could bring in even a small portion of the audience that artists needed to sell their work, that might become a much-needed revenue stream for him. Claire saw the enthusiasm in his eyes and offered to introduce him to a few friends who were looking for guidance. But still, there was the question of Andrew's immediate financial survival. He didn't want to put pressure on his budding connection with Claire by constantly whining about money, but he also realized she might actually give good advice. So one evening, after they had taken a long walk through the city park, Andrew decided to be more open about how dire his situation was. He spoke about the rent, the looming late fees, the credit card that was almost maxed out. He felt vulnerable. But Claire took his hand, squeezed it lightly, and said she believed he had enough skills to pull himself out of this hole. Her words sparked hope, and he realized that with some discipline and resourcefulness, he could turn things around. That night they lingered in the park until the sky turned purple, just talking about their dreams. Hers to eventually exhibit her paintings, his to live free from financial fear and do something meaningful with his talents. A few days later, Claire introduced Andrew to her friend Mark, a sculptor known for his vibrant metal figures that combined industrial scraps with delicate shapes. Mark had a show coming up in 2 months, but didn't know how to drum up excitement for it. Andrew proposed a mini online campaign. He would create a simple but eye-catching digital flyer, craft social media posts that told Mark's unique backstory, and reach out to local press with a short, well-written pitch. Mark agreed to a modest payment, which could help Andrew keep the lights on while he searched for more stable gigs. Over the following weeks, Andrew poured his energy into the project, learning about art forums, local event sites, and any place where Mark's work might catch a spark of interest. At times, Andrew still felt the sting of sleepless nights, worrying about whether he could pull off a real income. But every time he saw Claire, her smile and unwavering confidence in him reminded him why he was fighting so hard. The romance that blossomed between them wasn't just about stolen kisses in quiet corners. It was about partnership, mutual respect, and an unspoken agreement that they'd support each other's dreams. On days when Andrew felt overwhelmed by new tasks or the fear of failure, Claire would text him gentle reminders to breathe, to trust that every step forward, no matter how small, was part of a larger journey towards stability. The mini-campaign for Mark turned out well. More people showed up to his show than he'd ever expected, and local blogs picked up on his story, admiring how he fused recycled materials with artistic flair. Though the pay was modest, Andrew felt an enormous sense of accomplishment. This small success led to introductions to more creatives in the community: a photographer who specialized in dreamy cityscapes, a jewelry maker exploring eco-friendly designs, and others who struggled with the business side of their craft. Andrew realized that while he might not make a fortune overnight, there was a genuine need for his marketing expertise. With each new client, he gained confidence. He learned to price his services in a way that felt fair both to him and the artists. Yet, the real world didn't disappear. Rent was still high, and Andrew's credit card debt didn't magically go away. One evening, as he and Claire watched a movie in her cozy living room, he quietly told her he was considering taking out another loan just to keep afloat until more clients came through. She paused the film and turned to face him. "I get why you feel like that," she said softly. "But maybe there's a better way to manage your finances. Have you thought about cutting back on some expenses or finding a temporary roommate?" Andrew tensed up at the idea, but he had to admit she was right. His current apartment was bigger than he truly needed, and if he rented out his extra room for a while, he could reduce his biggest bill each month. The thought of living with a stranger didn't thrill him, but he saw the logic. It might give him more breathing room while he built his freelance marketing services for creatives. He posted an ad for a roommate and, to his surprise, got several responses from people who seemed decent. After meeting a few candidates, he chose a soft-spoken grad student named Lucas who was studying environmental engineering. Lucas was tidy, respectful, and happy to contribute to chores, so the arrangement worked out better than Andrew could have hoped. Suddenly, the financial pressure eased a bit. Andrew could now focus on growing his list of clients without constantly worrying about late rent. The relief of that small change felt monumental, and it was a reminder that sometimes you have to make compromises to reach your bigger goals. Meanwhile, he started a spreadsheet, a simple one, to track what he earned from each project and what he spent on bills, food, and other necessities. Although Andrew used to roll his eyes at the idea of budgeting, he found it strangely empowering. By seeing exactly where his money was going, he felt more in control, and that sense of control fed into the budding confidence he was developing in his work. He also set aside a little portion of his income each time he completed a project, a small emergency fund, so that he wouldn't have to rely on credit cards in case something unexpected happened. It wasn't a fortune, but every bit helped. During that period of change, his bond with Claire deepened. They started sharing more aspects of their daily lives, from cooking dinner together with random ingredients they had on hand, to wandering through the local art supply store, daydreaming about future projects. Sometimes Claire would casually mention that Andrew's eyes lit up whenever he talked about helping artists succeed. That observation made him realize that he was no longer just looking at these marketing projects as a stopgap measure. He actually found fulfillment in helping creative souls showcase their work to the world. It gave him a sense of purpose far beyond simply paying bills. In between working on campaigns for local art shows and improving his budgeting skills, Andrew also learned the importance of setting boundaries. Some artists hoped he would do everything for free or for exposure, but he steadily learned how to stand his ground. He would politely explain the value of his services and how much time went into crafting a professional marketing plan. The process took patience, but he discovered that the right clients eventually found him. Clients who appreciated his skills and were willing to pay fairly. The financial lessons kept coming. He learned about basic investing from a friend who introduced him to a user-friendly app that allowed micro-investments. Andrew was initially skeptical. How could he invest if he barely had enough savings to cover emergencies? But his friend pointed out that even small regular contributions could grow over time. So Andrew set up automatic transfers of a tiny amount each month, just enough to get the hang of buying low-risk assets. He didn't expect to get rich from it, yet the act of participating, of taking even minimal steps to secure his financial future, made him feel more capable. It was another reminder that progress comes one step at a time. By the end of that summer, Andrew had developed a modest but steady clientele. Word of mouth spread among local creators, and he got referrals simply because his previous clients appreciated his approach. He kept overhead costs low by working from home, meeting clients in cafes or at their studios, and focusing on what he did best: telling authentic stories that connected artists with their audiences. Claire continued to be his biggest cheerleader, celebrating each victory, no matter how small, and offering a comforting shoulder whenever things felt uncertain. He recalled one night in particular. They were walking home under a sky sprinkled with stars, the street lamps reflecting on puddles left by a recent rain. Andrew admitted how different everything felt compared to when they first met in that cozy cafe. Back then, he was drowning in worry, unsure where to turn. Now he might not have been wealthy, but he had a direction, a plan, and a growing belief in his own abilities. Claire smiled at him, squeezed his hand, and said, "You've learned to see your own worth. That's what I find amazing." Their closeness bloomed into an authentic partnership, marked not just by romance, but by shared efforts to face life's challenges head-on. Sometimes they'd stay up late, brainstorming ways to expand Andrew's marketing services or discussing Claire's idea of hosting a small underground art event. They realized that both of them had a knack for nurturing the talents around them, her with her creative vision, him with his marketing know-how. It became a playful dream they joked about, opening a tiny gallery cafe or a collaborative art space. They didn't have the finances yet, but the dream itself gave them energy and hope. Even as Andrew's finances stabilized bit by bit, he kept in mind the lessons he was learning each day. First, he understood the importance of forging genuine connections. Without meeting Claire and branching into the local art scene, he might have been stuck in a cycle of anxiety and underpaid side gigs. Second, he recognized the power of keeping a close eye on where each dollar was going, which gave him the ability to make wiser choices about housing, expenses, and even which clients he could afford to take on pro bono if he wanted to help someone new get started. Lastly, he embraced the necessity of being adaptable. Just because his old career path closed off didn't mean he couldn't forge a new one, especially one that blended his professional skills with his newfound passion for the arts. There were, of course, rough patches along the way. One client ghosted him after he'd already spent hours crafting a campaign plan, and another kept pushing deadlines and payments further and further. Andrew felt the sting of frustration, but realized he needed a contract or at least a written agreement to protect himself. He worked on a simple template with clearly laid out terms: payment schedule, project scope, timelines. Claire helped him refine the wording so it sounded friendly, yet firm. When new clients approached, Andrew sent them the document before starting any work, making it a point that this was standard procedure for him. This small professional step saved him from further headaches down the line. Meanwhile, Andrew's living arrangement with Lucas turned into a surprisingly supportive friendship. Lucas's studies in environmental engineering inspired Andrew to think more sustainably about how he ran his freelance operation, printing fewer materials, choosing eco-friendly packaging for any promotional items, that sort of thing. In return, Andrew shared a few marketing tips for a project Lucas was involved in at the university. The synergy of them helping each other out was a small but genuine reminder that people can come together and create better outcomes than they would alone. During this same stretch of time, Andrew and Claire found their relationship growing from sweet affection to a deep-rooted love. They bonded over cooking adventurous meals, attempting recipes that ranged from homemade sushi to rustic bread. Some weekends they'd visit nearby galleries or outdoor markets. Andrew discovered that simply being around Claire's creative energy sparked his own enthusiasm in ways he never expected. Their conversations about life and future possibilities became more detailed, talking not just about personal dreams, but about the practical steps needed to make them real. Andrew vividly remembered the day he made his final payment on a high-interest credit card that had been plaguing him for what felt like forever. He'd been chipping away at the balance, doubling his minimum payments whenever he had extra funds. Seeing the balance finally drop to zero flooded him with a sense of freedom. He shared the news with Claire by spontaneously dancing around her living room, both of them laughing like kids. It was a small milestone, but also a giant leap in reclaiming his financial autonomy. That night, as they cuddled on the couch, Andrew admitted he still had a faint, lingering fear that something could go wrong at any moment. A client might disappear, or an unexpected expense could wipe out his savings. Claire listened carefully, then reminded him that the security he sought wasn't found in the absence of challenges, but in his growing ability to handle those challenges head-on. Together, they were building a life where they relied on their combined strengths: his marketing skills, her artistic vision, and their mutual support. And that reality, despite its unpredictability, was far more stable than Andrew had once believed possible. He began setting new financial goals: an emergency fund that covered at least 3 months of basic living costs, a plan to eventually upgrade his workspace, and even the idea of taking a short course on digital marketing trends to stay ahead in a competitive landscape. All the while, he continued to meet new artists, refine his marketing strategies, and watch as the city's creative scene benefited from his input. Sometimes, as he was typing up proposals late at night, he found himself smiling at the memory of the worried man he used to be and how far he'd come in a relatively short time. One of his proudest moments arrived unexpectedly when a small local newspaper decided to feature him in an article about people revitalizing the city's art community. The reporter interviewed Andrew about how he ended up working exclusively with creatives and how he balanced business sense with artistic sensitivity. Andrew spoke earnestly, highlighting how vital it was for artists to have someone who not only believed in their visions, but also knew the nuts and bolts of reaching audiences. The short article came out in both print and online form, leading to a fresh wave of inquiries. He was busier than ever, but it was a joyful busy. He was making a real difference and earning a decent living in the process. In parallel, Claire's own projects started to gain traction. Inspired by Andrew's marketing insights, she put together an online portfolio of her paintings. Some of the smaller pieces sold quickly, giving her the confidence to arrange a modest gallery event. Andrew helped spread the word through social media and local bulletin boards. On opening night, the gallery buzzed with excitement, friends and visitors crowding in to admire her work. When Claire's first painting sold to a couple who seemed genuinely moved by her style, Andrew found himself blinking away tears of pride. They had turned a stressful time into an opportunity for both of them to flourish, each encouraging the other in ways that might never have happened if they hadn't met on that uncertain night. By this point, Andrew was no stranger to teaching others what he had learned about personal finance. He started hosting informal workshops for newbie freelancers, many of whom were also artists looking to stabilize their income. He shared simple budgeting tricks, such as dividing expenses into different categories: rent, utilities, groceries, savings. So you always knew exactly how much you had left to spend or invest. He talked about negotiating fair fees with clients, creating a portfolio that told a compelling story, and using social platforms efficiently. Some participants admitted they found financial matters intimidating, but Andrew's friendly, down-to-earth approach helped them feel less overwhelmed. It was in one of those workshops that he realized just how much his journey had changed him. He was no longer the insecure man who thought he needed a big corporate gig to validate his skills. Now, he recognized his ability to guide others through the same minefields he had navigated. People looked to him with gratitude and trust, and that realization brought a mixture of humility and pride. He saw that financial literacy wasn't just about numbers. It was about believing in your capacity to handle whatever life throws at you. And that belief, he realized, had been nurtured by Claire's faith in him, as well as by his own dedication to keep learning and adapting. The seasons shifted, and the first hints of autumn brought crisp air and colorful leaves. Andrew and Claire, their relationship stronger than ever, decided to treat themselves to a short trip out of town. It wasn't a lavish vacation, just a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin belonging to one of Claire's friends. They spent their days hiking around the lake, admiring the changing foliage, and their nights curled up near a small fireplace. In those quiet moments, Andrew felt a deep sense of gratitude. He thought back to the winter before, when every morning felt like an uphill battle against bills, self-doubt, and a stalled career. Now, though he wasn't rolling in wealth, he could look at his life and say he was genuinely happy and steadily moving forward. He and Claire took time that weekend to discuss their next steps. They toyed with the dream of eventually opening a joint space, a corner cafe with walls dedicated to rotating art exhibits, a spot where creative minds could gather to discuss new ideas. They even imagined hosting weekend workshops on painting, marketing, or basic budgeting, bridging the gap between art and everyday practicality. While the specifics were far from finalized, the vision filled them both with a sense of possibility. Andrew also confided in her that he wanted to pay off one more nagging debt, a small personal loan he'd taken before they met, but that he planned to do it step by step so he wouldn't drain his emergency savings. Claire encouraged him, pointing out how much progress he'd already made. They kissed under the canopy of autumn leaves, the wind carrying the earthy scent of the forest around them, sealing a silent promise to support each other's ambitions. When they returned to the city, Andrew got back to work with renewed focus. The strategy was simple: carefully manage his funds, continue marketing campaigns for new clients, and gradually chip away at any lingering debt. Because he had a steady flow of projects, he was able to accelerate his payments while still setting aside money for savings. The routine he'd once feared had become a comforting rhythm: client consultations, marketing prep, budgeting, creative brainstorming with Claire, and the daily tasks of living that no longer seemed so overwhelming. He noticed that the more he practiced consistent financial habits, the more they became second nature. It wasn't about deprivation or constant penny pinching. It was about staying aware and making choices that aligned with his true goals. An unexpected highlight came when Mark, the sculptor who had given Andrew his first art client opportunity, recommended Andrew's services to a larger local cultural center. This organization held seasonal exhibitions, festivals, and workshops, and they needed someone to handle publicity. Andrew set up a meeting with the center's coordinator, prepared a polished presentation, and secured a decent contract. The pay was significantly higher than what he was used to, and the project promised valuable exposure to an even broader community of artists and attendees. Excitement coursed through him as he realized that the seeds he'd planted months before, when he was desperate for any paying job, were now blossoming into substantial career opportunities. He celebrated the news by taking Claire out to a cozy little bistro. Over a dinner of warm bread, hearty soup, and a shared slice of chocolate cake, they smiled at each other in that way people do when they're aware of how far they've come. Andrew felt the urge to express how thankful he was for everything she'd done. Her unwavering belief, her practical advice, her creative spark that seemed to light up everyone around her. But when he tried to put it into words, Claire simply leaned forward and kissed him gently, whispering that she was just as grateful for him. In the soft glow of the bistro's dim lights, it was clear they weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something real together. With the bigger contract in hand, Andrew was able to reach a new level of financial stability. He paid down more debt, considered upgrading some of his work equipment, and started making cautious plans to expand his services. He thought about hiring a junior assistant or collaborating with other marketing specialists, but he also didn't want to grow too fast. One of the lessons he'd learned was not to overextend himself financially or professionally. Instead, he took the path of slow, steady growth, which felt both safer and more sustainable for his personal sense of balance. Meanwhile, Claire's reputation in the art world began to rise. After her successful gallery showing, she got invited to participate in a group exhibition organized by one of the city's more prestigious art foundations. Andrew helped her prepare a short biography and an artist's statement, carefully selecting photos of her best pieces. The night of the opening, Claire stood in front of her painted canvases with a quiet confidence Andrew had never seen before. Guests came up to congratulate her, and a well-known collector even showed interest in purchasing a piece. As Andrew watched her beam with happiness, he thought about how their chance encounter had opened a door not just to love, but to an entire future of shared creativity and mutual empowerment. In reflecting on all that had happened, Andrew recognized key pillars that had guided him out of financial turmoil and into a place of promise. The first was determination. He never stopped looking for ways to merge his skills with the opportunities around him, even if it meant making tough decisions like taking on a roommate. The second was community. Meeting Claire, connecting with artists, and reaching out to friends who could offer advice. And the third was balance. Learning to track his spending, set aside savings, and invest even a little in his future, so he wouldn't feel constantly on the edge of collapse. Alongside these came the priceless realization that romance and partnership, when rooted in understanding and collaboration, can inspire you to achieve far more than you'd manage alone. As the months continued, their schedules grew busier, but they kept making time for each other. They understood that while both of them were driven, Andrew with his marketing business and Claire with her artistic pursuits, their relationship needed care and attention, just like any other important aspect of life. They found little ways to connect. Morning coffee together if they had a late start, evening strolls by the waterfront on warmer days, or quick lunch dates at a local sandwich shop. Whenever one felt stress creeping in, the other was there to offer encouragement or share a silly moment to break the tension. The synergy extended to their professional worlds as well. Andrew became a go-to marketing consultant for a wider range of creative ventures: local bands, independent film screenings, artisan workshops. He refined his pitch, honing in on each client's unique story and learning how to present it compellingly to the public. Meanwhile, Claire's paintings evolved in style and depth, reflecting her own journey of self-discovery and newfound confidence. Every so often, she'd let Andrew sit in on her painting sessions. He loved observing her quiet focus, the way her brush moved across the canvas with intuitive grace. Their separate passions informed each other, forming a cycle of shared growth. Still, they were not immune to difficulties. At one point, Andrew lost a major client due to budget cuts, and Claire had a creative block that made her question whether her new work was any good. They spent a few tense weeks holding each other up with reassurance and brainstorming solutions. Andrew realized that financial confidence wasn't just about having money in the bank. It was about being able to weather setbacks with a clear head and maintain faith in one's capabilities. After some introspection and many late-night conversations, they emerged from that slump stronger than before. By the time winter rolled back around, they were in a much different place than they had been the previous year. Andrew's freelance marketing work had turned into a legitimate small business with a growing roster of happy clients. He no longer woke up in a cold sweat over how he'd pay rent. And Claire, still brimming with inspiration, was planning her first solo exhibition, an event that would highlight her evolution as an artist. They often reflected on how a single encounter in a tiny cafe had snowballed into all of this. A romance layered with creativity, a supportive network of friends and clients, and a future brimming with possibilities. For Andrew, perhaps the biggest personal milestone was being able to set a realistic timeline to fully clear out his remaining debts. If all went well, he'd be debt-free within the year, and every new project he took on could then go directly towards savings and reinvestment in his business. He and Claire talked about possibly moving in together, blending their living spaces into a shared studio office haven. It was a step that felt right, given how naturally their lives had already begun to intertwine. No official announcements, no rush, but the idea was there, growing like a seed planted in fertile soil. In these moments, Andrew marveled at how everything was interconnected. Love, money, personal growth, and creative expression. He understood that romance wasn't just about poetry and candlelit dinners. It was about showing up for each other when life got messy, finding ways to merge dreams into workable plans, and learning from every bump in the road. He realized how love can provide the anchor you need when facing financial storms, but that it also demands you keep bettering yourself so you can stand tall on your own 2 feet. Claire's outlook mirrored his. She'd once been shy about showing her art to the world, worried that nobody would connect with her style or that her self-doubts would overshadow any progress. Meeting Andrew, and watching him turn his own struggles into stepping stones, had encouraged her to be more daring. Each time she put on a new exhibition, each time she posted her work online, she was also quietly proving to herself that she had something valuable to share. One snowy evening, they found themselves walking down the same street where they'd first crossed paths. The cafe was still there, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Without saying a word, they slipped inside and found a corner table. Everything felt like a meaningful echo of that first night. The hum of conversations, the smell of hot drinks, the ambient background music. Andrew sat across from Claire, remembering how nervous he'd been, how uncertain. He was reminded of the swirling chaos in his mind that evening and the incredible journey that had unfolded since. Claire must have been thinking the same because she gently placed her hand on his and said, "Look how far we've come." Andrew's heart felt full as he nodded, reflecting on the lessons that had shaped him into the person he was now. He had learned not to let fear or shame lock him in place. He had discovered the beauty of blending practical skills with genuine passion, and he had embraced the value of budgeting and mindful financial habits. Most of all, he had uncovered the quiet power of love, how it could fuel a person's determination and turn every small triumph into a shared celebration. He looked into Claire's eyes, trying to find the words to sum it all up, but words felt small for the magnitude of what he felt. Instead, he smiled, reached for her hand, and squeezed it gently. The future was still unwritten, and they knew new challenges would arise. But here, in the comforting glow of the cafe, they both understood that as long as they kept supporting each other, kept learning and adapting, they would be ready for whatever came next. They sat there for a while, sipping their drinks, lost in the quiet, unspoken gratitude of how a chance meeting had sparked not just a romance, but a journey of self-improvement and financial rebirth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside their hearts, there was only warmth and the gentle promise of a tomorrow they were forging together. They decided to host a small holiday gathering for friends a week before Christmas. Some of Andrew's clients, a few of Claire's fellow artists, and even Lucas and his new partner crowded into Andrew's apartment, though by now it felt just as much Claire's home as his. The place was filled with laughter, mulled wine, and plates of homemade treats. Mark brought a new sculpture to show everyone, carefully positioned in a corner with a soft lamp shining on its metallic curves. The jewelry designer Andrew had worked with displayed a few of her winter collection pieces on a tabletop. Claire had put up a mini pop-up gallery of her smaller canvases on the walls, which turned the living room into a colorful reflection of her creative spirit. As the evening went on, Andrew found himself standing in the middle of the crowd, marveling at how this sense of community had grown from what once felt like hopeless isolation. Some of the guests were exchanging ideas on upcoming projects. A couple of them were already brainstorming collaborative efforts, and there was a general buzz of excitement about where the next year could lead them all. A while ago, Andrew might have stood at a party like this feeling insecure, worried about when the next financial disaster would hit. Now he felt grounded. Sure, there were still months of hard work ahead. He had to manage his new contract with the cultural center, keep nurturing relationships with existing clients, and stick to his plan for clearing any remaining debts. But he no longer doubted that he could handle it. He poured himself a glass of sparkling juice, noticing Claire at the far end of the room, engaged in a lively conversation with a local muralist. Their eyes met, and she smiled. To him, that smile spoke volumes. Gratitude for the partnership they had built, joy for the creative synergy they shared, and confidence in the path they were forging. He walked over and wrapped his arm around her waist, listening as she excitedly explained her technique for layering paints to create a sense of depth and motion. The muralist nodded, fascinated. Andrew couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, both in her and in what they were accomplishing together. After the last guests left, they tidied up the living room, stacking used glasses and plates in the sink. The remnants of laughter and conversation still lingered in the air. Andrew sank onto the couch, and Claire joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. They both felt that pleasant exhaustion that comes after hosting a successful gathering. Gently, Claire said, "I can't believe how different everything is from last Christmas. It's like we've turned our whole lives around." Andrew nodded, remembering the stress of that previous year, the loneliness, and the crippling anxiety that came with it. Yet here they were, side by side, their relationship glowing with a sense of shared purpose. Andrew reflected on the lessons that had led to this quiet triumph. 1. Never underestimate the doors that can open if you stay open-minded and courageous enough to walk through them. Like that night, he approached Claire in the cafe. 2. Managing money isn't about becoming a spreadsheet-obsessed drone. It's about giving yourself a foundation of security so you can pour your energy into the things and people you love. 3. Genuine partnerships, romantic or otherwise, are built on mutual support and trust, and can elevate both individuals to new heights. Winter melted into a fresh spring, and with it came the official end to Andrew's last remaining debt. He'd paced his payments carefully, making sure to leave enough for living expenses and a small cushion for emergencies. The day he logged into his account and saw a zero balance where once there had been a daunting figure, he let out a shout of joy that echoed through the apartment. Claire rushed in from the other room, and when he told her, she jumped into his arms, laughing as she planted an enthusiastic kiss on his cheek. They celebrated with a simple home-cooked meal that night, clinking glasses of sparkling water with a toast to new beginnings. Freed from that final financial weight, Andrew felt a renewed surge of creativity. He started brainstorming ways to streamline his marketing approach. He considered putting together an online course or a digital guide specifically aimed at artists who wanted to learn the basics of self-promotion. While he wasn't sure how big of a market there would be, the idea excited him. Maybe he could reach even more people, help them avoid the pitfalls he had barely managed to climb out of. Claire, always the supportive partner, encouraged him to give it a shot, offering to create some original illustrations for the guide to make it more visually appealing. Their home life also took a step forward when they found a more spacious apartment. one with a room that could serve as a shared studio and office. The moment they walked into it, with its large windows and a flood of natural light, they both felt this was where they needed to be. It would cost a bit more, but they had reached a point where they could handle it comfortably, especially if they continued to keep a close watch on their spending. Moving day was filled with the usual chaos of boxes and misplaced items, but by late evening, they had turned the place into something that felt uniquely theirs. Andrew assembled a set of shelves for his marketing books, and Claire hung her paintings in spots where the natural light showcased their textures. They even found a cozy corner by a window for lazy Sunday mornings, complete with 2 armchairs and a small coffee table. One day, after settling in, Andrew stood by that window, feeling a mixture of peace and anticipation. He thought about everything that had happened, losing his old job, stumbling into a financial crisis, meeting Claire, rediscovering his own worth, and slowly but surely building a career that felt genuinely fulfilling. He'd learned that setbacks can become catalysts for growth if you keep an open heart and mind. It struck him that he was actually thankful for those tough times, because they'd led him to discover who he truly was and the people he was meant to meet. As he gazed out at the cityscape, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the success he was experiencing, but for the love and partnership that had blossomed in the midst of difficulty. Claire appeared behind him, sliding her arms around his waist. They stood there together, quiet, savoring the moment. She murmured that she had new ideas for her next series of paintings, something inspired by reflections on glass and water, tying in with themes of renewal. Andrew teased that he would be her marketing guy forever, ensuring the world got to see her brilliance. They laughed at that, knowing it was both a joke and a heartfelt truth. Their closeness felt easy, like breathing, and Andrew thought back to that initial sense of calm he'd felt the night he first approached her table in the cafe. It was as if some part of him had always known he needed to speak to her. Their days became a steady rhythm of work and creative exploration, peppered with dinners at new local spots, evenings of reading or painting, and occasional weekend trips to nearby towns to explore art fairs and antique shops. Despite their growing comfort, they never forgot the lessons about financial discipline. Even though Andrew now had a decent monthly income, he regularly stashed away a portion into savings and a small investment account. Claire, too, started putting some of her earnings aside for future gallery shows and materials. Every so often they'd review their budgets together, not as a chore, but as a conscious practice that gave them the freedom to invest in their dreams. One afternoon, Mark called with exciting news. He'd been invited to showcase his sculptures at a major festival in a neighboring region, and the organizers wanted Andrew to handle the promotional aspect, not just for Mark, but for several other artists attending. This was a bigger opportunity than anything Andrew had tackled so far. The festival was well known, and if he pulled it off, his reputation could expand beyond the city limits. He said yes with both enthusiasm and a tinge of nerves. But after years of building confidence, he believed he could rise to the challenge. He would have to coordinate multiple campaigns, each highlighting the distinctive style of the participating artists. Claire offered to help create some graphics for the promotional materials, combining her artistic flair with Andrew's marketing message. They spent many late nights brainstorming designs and taglines, fueled by endless cups of tea and playful banter. It was intense, but exhilarating. As they worked, Andrew frequently remembered how far he'd come since those days of frantically searching for any job that would pay the bills. Now he was a professional who had garnered enough trust in the creative community that people sought him out for major events. When the festival finally arrived, Andrew and Claire traveled together, thrilled to see the fruit of their collaboration displayed on posters, flyers, and social media ads all around the venue. The energy was electric, artists from different cities gathered, live performances took place on a small stage, and curious visitors moved between booths and installations. Mark's metal sculptures shone under the festival lights, attracting a stream of admirers. Several of them mentioned they'd come specifically because they'd seen the online campaign Andrew created. Each time someone said that, Andrew felt a surge of quiet pride. This was the sum of all those lessons, all that careful budgeting, all that faith in his own potential. Late on the last night of the festival, he and Claire strolled through the grounds, now half deserted after the crowds had gone. The stars shimmered in the clear sky, and the air held the lingering echoes of music and laughter. Andrew couldn't help but reflect on the synergy between his professional success and their personal love story. One had fueled the other, guiding him through financial hardship and pushing him to remain focused on both business growth and emotional connection. The two of them took a seat on a wooden bench near a softly lit sculpture garden. As Claire rested her head on Andrew's shoulder, he felt the gentle rise and fall of her breath and allowed himself a moment of complete contentment. On the ride back home, they chatted about the highlights of the festival, sharing stories of interesting people they'd met and possible opportunities that might arise from those new connections. Claire joked that soon Andrew would need an assistant to handle the workload, and Andrew laughed, thinking it might actually be true. Yet for all his ambition, he knew he wanted to keep the personal touch that had made his marketing so effective in the first place. "It's about caring for what they create," he said thoughtfully, "not just about pushing a product." A quiet settled over them for a while, the road humming beneath the car. Then Claire asked a question that made Andrew's heart skip. "Do you think we'll ever start that gallery cafe we used to joke about?" He glanced at her, seeing the faint curiosity in her eyes. He replied that it wasn't just a joke. It was a dream that had been living in the back of his mind all along. They didn't have all the resources yet, but they had determination, a network of fellow artists, and enough experience now to handle the promotional and financial sides. Maybe one day they'd take the leap, find a small place with high ceilings and good foot traffic, and fill it with art, music, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The thought alone made them both smile at the possibilities yet to come. They returned to their shared home, unpacked, and eased back into their daily routines. Andrew wrote up detailed reports on the festival campaign, and Claire started new sketches inspired by the swirling lights and lively atmosphere they'd witnessed. Life felt rich and purposeful. Even the small challenges, like a sudden repair needed in their apartment or a tricky negotiation with a demanding client, didn't rattle Andrew the way they once would have. He had internalized the notion that while you can't control every variable, you can control how prepared you are. A healthy savings account, a willingness to adapt, and a supportive partner made all the difference. Andrew also realized how important it was to maintain the romance in their relationship. They occasionally scheduled nights when work talk was off the table, and they just focused on each other. Maybe watching a classic film, experimenting with a new recipe, or simply reading side by side in comfortable silence. That balance, Andrew thought, was a big part of what kept them both thriving in their personal and professional lives. He loved how Claire's creative spirit helped him see the world in color, and how she, in turn, leaned on his sense of structure and strategy whenever she needed clarity. As time continued to unfold, Andrew remained humble about his achievements. He didn't see himself as a financial guru or a superstar entrepreneur. He simply recognized that he'd been on the edge of losing everything, had met the right person at the right time, and had chosen to learn from each stumble along the way. It was that blend of luck, love, and active perseverance that kept propelling him forward. The romance that had started so unexpectedly in a small cafe had grown into a shared life that nurtured both of their dreams. And somehow, that intangible quality of their connection seemed to radiate outward, drawing more collaborators, friends, and even mentors into their orbit. One evening, as they sat under soft lamplight reviewing potential locations for their dream gallery cafe, now no longer just a whimsical idea but a project in the planning stages, Andrew felt a gentle wave of nostalgia. He pictured himself in that old cafe, back when he was almost broke and completely uncertain about tomorrow. He remembered how Claire's simple interest and kindness had melted away so many of his anxieties in just a few hours of conversation. He still felt that sense of awe whenever he realized how drastically life can change when you allow yourself to take a brave step, whether it's reaching out to a stranger or daring to transform your career path. Claire seemed to sense his introspection. She lifted her gaze from the notes they were discussing and asked him what was on his mind. Andrew told her about the memory, about the swirl of feelings he'd had that night and how meeting her felt like a turning point. She laughed lightly, recalling how she almost didn't go to that cafe because it was out of the way. "I guess we were meant to find each other," she said, her voice tinged with happy disbelief. Then, as she reached for his hand, they both sank into a comfortable silence, letting that thought breathe. In that moment, Andrew understood that while every financial plan, every marketing strategy, and every item on a to-do list was essential, love gave it all meaning. Love was the reason he wanted to build something sustainable, not just for himself, but for them both. A creative haven they could share with their community. It was as if the financial storm he'd endured had been a test, preparing him to recognize real gratitude, real connection, and real resilience when it finally came his way. He smiled at Claire and promised himself he would continue to embrace each obstacle as an invitation to grow, knowing that the real treasure in life wasn't a pile of money, but the partnership, trust, and sense of purpose they were cultivating together. And in that commitment, he felt the subtle pulse of a romance that would remain alive and evolving for as long as they both kept choosing each other, day after day, project after project, dream after dream. The months turned into another year. By now, Andrew had carefully laid the groundwork for hiring a junior assistant, a bright go-getter named Sophia, who had recently graduated from a local college. She handled some of the administrative tasks, freeing Andrew to concentrate on creating more in-depth marketing campaigns. Claire's painting career flourished too, with invitations from different galleries to participate in special themed exhibits. Watching each other excel in their passions had become a form of shared celebration. When one of them landed a new client or received a positive review, they'd treat themselves to an evening out or try a fun weekend activity. It was a small ritual that reminded them to appreciate every win, no matter how routine life could sometimes feel. In the midst of their bustling schedules, they kept pushing forward with the gallery cafe plan, saving each month, scouting possible locations, and even gathering ideas from their network of artists, bakers, and community organizers. The city was known for its eclectic art scene, so they felt there was a real chance of succeeding if they found just the right spot. They wanted a place with enough space for rotating exhibits, a corner for performances, and a small but well-equipped kitchen for the cafe portion. Their vision was more than just a business. They wanted it to be a hub of inspiration, a cozy space where strangers could connect, local talent could shine, and anyone who walked in could feel welcomed. Despite the ambition, they remained grounded. Andrew's experiences with financial hardship had taught him to avoid reckless leaps. He insisted on having at least a year's worth of operating expenses saved up before signing a lease. Claire supported this approach wholeheartedly, recalling what it was like when both of them lived paycheck to paycheck. They saw the value in patience, in building a sturdy foundation that could withstand unexpected challenges. So they remained on the lookout, quietly gathering resources and refining their business plan. It might take another year or more before they were ready, and that was okay. They understood that real magic often needed time to brew. In the meantime, their personal life felt wonderfully stable. They still had the occasional argument, like any couple, but even those disagreements eventually brought them closer, revealing new dimensions of each other's personalities. When life got hectic, they'd pause for a breath and reflect on how they'd navigated worse moments in the past. The stress of balancing multiple clients or prepping for a big art show was nothing compared to the looming dread Andrew once felt when his bank account was almost empty and he had no steady job in sight. One day, Andrew's father came to visit. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and Andrew was a bit nervous because he'd never really detailed how dire his financial situation had been. But as his father walked around the new apartment, seeing the dedicated studio space and hearing about Andrew's budding marketing business, he looked genuinely impressed. Claire joined them, showing Andrew's father some of her latest pieces and explaining how Andrew had been crucial in helping her connect with galleries. Over dinner, Andrew's father quietly said, "I'm proud of you," in a tone that suggested he knew more of the struggles than Andrew had assumed. It was a simple sentence, but felt like a major moment of reconciliation and understanding between them. Sometimes acknowledging progress out loud can validate all the behind-the-scenes effort that goes into remaking one's life. As the evening wrapped up, his father hugged them both, and Andrew felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was the kind of warmth that comes from knowing the people you care about, see how far you've come, and respect the path you chose. After his father left, Andrew and Claire sat together, each sipping a mug of tea in contented silence. They felt like they were on a steady upward path that, while not free of obstacles, was guided by clarity and mutual support. Soon, another significant opportunity presented itself. The cultural center Andrew had been working with decided to expand its calendar of events, adding a quarterly arts festival that included pop-up galleries, live performances, and interactive workshops for the public. They offered Andrew a chance to become a more permanent collaborator, a kind of marketing director on a flexible contract. He'd still maintain his freelance clients, but he'd have a more reliable baseline income from the center. At first, he worried about losing his independence, but he soon realized the contract was designed to respect his autonomy. It was a best-of-both-worlds situation. On top of that, the pay was fair, which meant he could accelerate his savings plan for the future gallery cafe with Claire. He mulled over the offer while discussing it with Claire, who reminded him how freeing it would be to have a stable monthly income for once. "Imagine if we can push up our timeline for the gallery cafe," she said, a spark in her eye. Andrew agreed, feeling a flutter of excitement. This new position could be a stepping stone, not a cage. After carefully reviewing the terms, he signed the contract with a sense of optimism and relief. A few days later, he started immersing himself in the center's broader vision, developing marketing strategies that spanned beyond a single event. He was in a pivotal role, helping shape how the community engaged with art on a regular basis. And that responsibility fueled him with a deeper sense of purpose. Claire stood by him through the transition, taking on a couple of commissioned pieces to bring in a bit of extra income. She even started experimenting with collaborative works, teaming up with a poet and a digital artist to create multi-layered experiences that combined visuals, words, and interactive elements. Andrew loved hearing about their progress at the end of each day. Their dinners became a lively exchange of ideas. How to brand these collaborative pieces? Which demographic might be most interested? Whether a pop-up event could draw more attention than a traditional gallery format? It felt as though every conversation sparked new creativity, reinforcing why they made such a dynamic team. But life being life, the road wasn't without bumps. A sudden economic downturn hit the city, causing some local businesses to cut back on marketing budgets. Andrew felt a slight dip in freelance inquiries, which, under normal circumstances, might have caused him to panic. Yet this time, he had the cushioning of his contract with the cultural center, along with a decent emergency fund. Instead of worrying about immediate survival, he could concentrate on weathering the storm and even put more energy into the cultural center's projects. He also took a moment to reflect on how grateful he was for making those earlier budgeting moves. Finding a roommate when times were tight, negotiating fair rates with clients, and building a small investment portfolio. Those steps collectively shielded him from the instability he might have otherwise faced. Meanwhile, Claire had her own setback. One of her much-anticipated exhibits got postponed indefinitely due to venue complications. She was disappointed, and for a week or two, Andrew noticed her morale dipping. Recognizing the signs of creative frustration, he encouraged her to channel that energy into new experiments or to hold a smaller, independent showing. Instead of letting gloom settle in, Claire picked herself up and arranged a last-minute pop-up exhibit at a friend's loft. Though it was on a smaller scale, it attracted a surprisingly enthusiastic crowd. Some locals who were curious about new art, some loyal fans, and a few new faces who heard about it through Andrew's marketing push. The event turned out to be intimate but meaningful, reminding Claire that setbacks could become opportunities if approached with the right mindset. It was around this time that Andrew started jotting down his reflections in a personal journal. Thoughts about financial stability, about how love and partnership had shaped his journey, and about the creative synergy he saw blossoming all around him. He had an idea to compile these musings into a short ebook or blog series, hoping it might help others who found themselves in similar predicaments. Claire read a few of his drafted chapters and encouraged him to share them publicly, even if it was just through a simple website or social platform. She insisted that others could benefit from reading a story that combined personal finance lessons with a romantic journey. Andrew hesitated, not wanting to brand himself as an all-knowing mentor. But Claire's reassurance that authenticity mattered more than perfection convinced him to at least try. He started posting short entries online, detailing how he'd navigated the early days of debt, the practical tips he learned about budgeting and negotiating, and how meeting Claire was the spark that ignited his transformation. To his surprise, the posts garnered attention from people who said they felt encouraged by his honesty. Some thanked him for shedding light on how love could play a positive role in overcoming financial hurdles. Others appreciated the straightforward breakdown of budgeting methods and creative ways to find new income streams. Little by little, Andrew's online presence became more than just a marketing portfolio. It was a story of hope, resilience, and possibility. He received messages from across the country, and even a few from abroad, asking for advice or simply stating that his journey had given them the motivation to look at their own financial or emotional struggles differently. Andrew would read these late at night, sometimes while Claire was painting in the next room, and he felt an odd mixture of humility and pride. His once private struggles had become a source of light for strangers. One evening, as he was about to post another entry, he paused, reflecting on how everything seemed to circle back to that quiet moment in the cafe where he and Claire first crossed paths. He typed a line about how crucial it was to remain open to unexpected relationships, both personal and professional, because you never know which one could become the turning point in your life. When he showed the post to Claire, she read it with a soft smile, then leaned in for a gentle kiss, whispering, "Thank you for walking over to my table that night." Andrew's heart felt full, remembering how nervous he'd been, yet how compelled to reach out. That single decision had changed everything. Around the same time, the seeds they'd planted for the gallery cafe began to show shoots of real progress. A friend of a friend mentioned a vacant storefront with large windows, situated on a charming cobblestone street where foot traffic was decent. Andrew and Claire decided to check it out. The moment they stepped inside, they pictured how the space could look with minimal renovations, walls lined with rotating art, a small stage area for acoustic sets or poetry readings, and a corner for coffee and pastries. It was smaller than some places they'd considered, but it had a welcoming vibe. The rent was on the higher end of their budget, but still within reach if they managed it right. They spent days crunching numbers, weighing pros and cons, and talking to local business owners about foot traffic and neighborhood demographics. In parallel, Andrew revisited all his carefully compiled data from previous projects, while Claire sketched potential layouts for the interior. They brainstormed a name, something simple yet memorable that captured both the aesthetic of an art gallery and the casual comfort of a cafe. After much debate, they landed on Canvas and Roast, a nod to both creativity and the warmth of shared experiences over a cup of coffee. Though they hadn't signed anything yet, the idea felt more real than ever. They recognized that stepping into this venture was a risk, but it was a calculated one. They had a cushion, a concept, a community of supporters, and a determination that had carried them through so many obstacles already. During one late-night conversation, Andrew voiced his lingering anxieties about the possibility of a recession, about the unpredictability of running a physical space. Claire responded by listing all the ways they'd handle challenges, from hosting special events to keep interest high, to offering seasonal promotions, to maintaining their online presence. She reminded him that building something meaningful always involved a degree of uncertainty, but they were far better equipped to handle it now than they'd ever been before. They decided to put in an offer, making sure to include a condition that gave them time to secure the necessary permits and complete a thorough inspection. The landlord, intrigued by their vision and seeing their track record, agreed to negotiate. A few weeks later, after sorting out paperwork, scheduling walkthroughs with architects, and finalizing a lease with the necessary contingencies, Andrew and Claire found themselves holding the keys to the storefront. It was surreal, like they'd just crossed a threshold into a new reality. They stood in the vacant space, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off empty walls, imagining how it would look in a few months when bustling with art, conversation, and the aroma of fresh coffee. The moment felt monumental. Andrew looked at Claire, recalling how uncertain and financially strapped he'd been not too long ago. Now they were business partners, artistic collaborators, and life companions. He felt a lump in his throat, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their journey. Claire must have sensed his emotions because she stepped closer, took his hand and said, "We did this together." With that, they stepped forward, eager and cautious, ready to transform those blank walls into a beacon of inspiration for themselves and their community. The build-out process for Canvas and Roast was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. They hired a small team of contractors to handle the heavy lifting, installing proper lighting, upgrading the electrical system to support coffee machines, and ensuring the plumbing could handle a small kitchen area. Claire's vision for the walls involved a neutral tone that let the artwork shine, punctuated by occasional accent colors. Andrew focused on budgeting, marketing timelines, and the endless list of logistics: permits, cafe supply orders, local vendor relationships for pastries and fresh ingredients. They aimed to source responsibly and support smaller local farms and bakeries, aligning with their community-centric philosophy. During the renovation, Andrew would often arrive early to talk with the contractors, ensuring everything stayed on schedule and within budget. Claire would swing by in the afternoons, sometimes bringing sketches of how the space might look with certain displays or furniture arrangements. They found a comfortable compromise between aesthetics and practicality, choosing furniture that was both stylish and easy to move around for events. Every decision felt like a piece of a bigger puzzle, a chance to fuse their passions into something tangible. At night, they'd collapse onto their couch, poring over spreadsheets and design mock-ups, occasionally bursting into sudden laughter when they realized how surreal it all felt. Their conversation teemed with excitement about opening day, what local band they might invite, whether they should feature an opening exhibition of Claire's or highlight a range of local artists to represent the broader community. They even tested coffee blends at home, turning the kitchen into a mini lab of aromas and flavors. Their life, once overshadowed by financial uncertainty, now revolved around creating a haven of art and warmth for others. Their friends, both old and new, stepped in to help where they could. Mark offered to craft a unique metal sign for the entrance, forging the words "Canvas and Roast" in a sleek but eye-catching design. Lucas, Andrew's former roommate, volunteered his weekends to help paint walls and move equipment. Some local musicians, grateful for Andrew's marketing assistance in the past, expressed interest in performing at the cafe's launch. Everything they had given to the community over the years was now coming back in waves of support. Amidst the hustle, they also maintained their existing commitments. Andrew continued with the cultural center's marketing work, ensuring a steady income stream that provided a safety net. Claire stayed active in her own projects, balancing them with the demanding schedule of the cafe's launch. They were careful not to let the new venture overshadow their relationship either, carving out quiet moments to recharge, simple dinners, or walks along the waterfront at dusk, reminding themselves that the core of everything was the bond they shared. Finally, after weeks of intense preparation, the day for a soft opening arrived. They decided to keep it low-key, inviting a handful of friends, family, and key community members to test the waters before the official grand opening. Andrew felt a swirl of nerves as he unlocked the doors that afternoon, the interior still carrying that fresh paint smell mixed with the rich aroma of ground coffee. Claire double-checked the artwork on the walls, an inviting collection featuring several local artists, including a few of her own pieces. The overall vibe was cozy, with soft lighting and comfortable seating scattered around. A small corner stage stood ready for a guitar or a spoken word mic. As people trickled in, Andrew and Claire took turns greeting guests, offering them samples of different coffee blends and pastries. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Folks admired the intimate atmosphere, the attention to detail in the art displays, and the sense that this was more than just a place to grab a quick latte. Friends congratulated them on how they'd merged utility and aesthetic pleasure into one space. Mark's metal sign drew compliments from everyone who passed by outside. At one point, Andrew noticed Claire standing by a wall, quietly watching the crowd with a fond smile, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and pride. Toward the end of the evening, a local singer-songwriter performed a short acoustic set. As her gentle tunes filled the air, Andrew and Claire took a moment to stand back, letting the music wash over them. They exchanged a glance that seemed to say, "Can you believe we did this?" And Andrew slipped his arm around Claire's shoulders. The space was alive with conversation, clinking coffee cups, and laughter. It felt like a culmination of every risk, every late-night worry, every scrap of hope they'd nurtured since they first met. And yet, it was also just the beginning. In the following days, the energy around Canvas and Roast grew. The grand opening was announced for the coming weekend, with flyers designed by Andrew, social media posts, and word-of-mouth buzz. Local publications picked up the story, intrigued by a venue that promised both a cafe experience and an evolving art gallery. They interviewed Andrew and Claire about their journey, focusing not only on the cafe but also on their personal story, how they'd met and supported each other through financial hurdles, turning adversity into a foundation for something meaningful. The interviews were honest and heartfelt, resonating with many readers who found hope in the idea that love and determination could lead to tangible success. On the morning of the grand opening, Andrew woke up early, mind racing with final to-do lists. Confirm the delivery of fresh pastries, check the sound system for the live performance, finalize seat arrangements. Claire had barely slept either, her thoughts cycling between excitement and last-minute jitters. They arrived at the cafe before sunrise, switching on the lights to reveal a space waiting to be filled with life. The first wave of visitors arrived right after they opened the doors. Neighbors, curious passers-by, and supportive friends. Throughout the day, a steady stream of people poured in. Some admired the art, others curled up on couches with coffee and a book, and a few local media representatives snapped photos and asked questions. At one point, a journalist asked Andrew how he felt, seeing everything come together. Andrew hesitated, touched by a mix of joy and disbelief. "It feels like I'm living a different life than I was a couple of years ago," he finally said. "When I look around and see Claire's paintings on the wall, people enjoying their drinks, and artists chatting about potential collaborations, it reminds me that it all started with a moment of courage, saying hello to someone in a cafe when I was at my lowest point. This place is proof that if you're willing to learn from your struggles, stay open to possibilities, and share your journey with someone you trust, you can build something beautiful." Claire joined him, adding with a warm laugh, "And good coffee helps too." The journalist smiled, snapping a few more pictures before heading off to explore the venue. Watching the swirl of activity, orders being taken, cappuccinos frothed, an acoustic duo setting up on the small stage, Andrew felt an unwavering sense of gratitude. Late that afternoon, they finally caught a brief moment to themselves by the counter. Claire rested her head on Andrew's shoulder, eyes scanning the room. A wave of relief and accomplishment enveloped them both. "We did it," she whispered. Andrew nodded, recalling the nights of sleepless worry, the spreadsheets that once showed nothing but deficits, the first bits of hope sparked by Claire's supportive words. Here they were, the result of countless small decisions guided by love and resilience. As the day wore into night, the crowd thinned but never vanished. Some people stayed to listen to an open mic session while others browsed the artworks on display. Outside, streetlights flickered on, reflecting off Mark's metallic sign, which now had a subtle, warm glow. When they finally closed the doors, Andrew and Claire were exhausted, but too wired to sleep immediately. They collapsed into chairs, sipping water, too tired even to brew another cup of coffee. "So many months of preparation, and it's real now," Claire said softly. Andrew leaned in and kissed her temple, murmuring that it felt like the best kind of dream. They decided to walk home, hand in hand, letting the cool night air wash over them. Along the way, they passed by the old cafe where they'd first met. It was still open, lights twinkling, a few patrons inside. Without a word, they paused to look at it through the window. The memory of that night felt both distant and oddly present. Andrew could almost see himself, hunched over a cup of tea, drowning in worry yet on the brink of an entirely new life. Claire gave his hand a gentle squeeze, as if reading his thoughts. They continued on, hearts full, minds whirling with plans for tomorrow, next week, and the months ahead. Their story was far from over. Canvas and Roast was still a newborn venture, requiring daily attention, fresh ideas, and a watchful eye on finances. But they had come this far together, and that knowledge made every step forward feel lighter. Andrew thought of how love had taught him not to fear uncertainty but to harness it, using each challenge as fuel for growth. He realized that was the crux of everything, sharing dreams and fears alike so that neither overshadowed the other. In the weeks that followed, canvas and roast settled into a steady rhythm. Locals made it a routine stop for their morning coffee or afternoon break. Artists rotated their works, giving each visit a fresh feel. Live music nights and spoken word events became a staple, fostering a small but vibrant cultural scene. Andrew's marketing background proved invaluable in keeping the buzz alive, and Claire's artistic touch maintained the cafe's identity as a cozy yet inventive space. They found themselves fielding inquiries from out-of-town visitors, curious bloggers, and even a couple of small tourism guides that wanted to include them as a local highlight. Financially, they monitored everything with the same diligence Andrew had learned during his struggle. Overhead costs, inventory staffing, and revenue streams were carefully tracked. Whenever a slight dip in sales occurred, they discussed potential strategies, maybe a themed event or a special promotion. Over time, they even introduced merchandise like mugs featuring Claire's designs, which turned out to be a hit among regulars. Each day ended with a sense of accomplishment, but also a recognition that running a business meant continuous adaptation. They were grateful for the stability afforded by Andrew's contract with the cultural center, which he still honored part-time, balancing his hours meticulously to ensure both commitments thrived. Occasionally, they argued over scheduling conflicts, different visions for new exhibits, or how best to handle a tricky customer. But these disagreements never escalated into deep rifts. Their relationship, forged in the fires of adversity, had taught them how to communicate openly, compromise when needed, and let love guide them back to common ground. In the quiet aftermath of each argument, they found a stronger, more unified perspective. On a slow Tuesday evening, as they were closing up shop, Claire remarked how surreal it was to watch people linger over coffee, discussing art and music in a place that used to be an empty storefront. Andrew remembered the first time he had pushed open the door of that vacant space, measuring the walls and floors with cautious optimism. Now the walls were adorned with local talent, the floors bustling daily with customers and the echoes of their conversations. "It's like we breathed life into it," Claire said, setting chairs on tables. Andrew nodded, adding that the place had also breathed life into them, giving them a renewed sense of purpose and partnership. That night, they decided to walk the long route home, weaving through quiet streets under a moonlit sky. Andrew mused about the next steps, maybe hosting a monthly speaker series, inviting local entrepreneurs or creatives to share their experiences. Claire mentioned a possible collaboration with a traveling art collective that wanted to do pop-up exhibitions around the city. Their synergy of ideas felt boundless, an ongoing conversation that bridged romance and business into one seamless tapestry. Upon arriving home, they found a letter in the mail from a publisher who had taken note of Andrew's blog posts. The editor said she was intrigued by the combination of financial advice, personal storytelling, and romantic undertones. She wondered if Andrew would be interested in turning it into a more extensive book. Andrew's first reaction was disbelief. Could his personal reflections really hold enough substance for a published piece? Claire opened the letter and squealed with excitement before he could even finish reading. She insisted that he at least explore the offer. After all, he'd already inspired a smaller online community. Perhaps a book could help even more people. Andrew agreed to a phone call with the editor, keeping his expectations modest. But the conversation left him feeling genuinely excited about the possibility. Maybe he could structure the chapters around each pivotal lesson, weaving in how love, friendship, and creativity played vital roles in overcoming financial struggle. The editor encouraged him to be as candid as possible, explaining that readers connected with authenticity above all else. Andrew promised to send a rough outline, though he couldn't commit to an immediate timeline given the demands of the cafe. Still, the spark was there, a new avenue to share his story. All the while, Claire kept nurturing her own art, taking quiet hours to explore new techniques. She claimed a small corner of the cafe's back room as her mini studio, allowing her to paint whenever business was slow or inspiration struck between tasks. Andrew loved seeing her slip into that creative flow, brush in hand, eyes fixed on a canvas as though she was gazing at another world. Sometimes he'd quietly stand there, not wanting to interrupt, just observing the gentle sway of her body and the calm concentration that glowed around her. It reminded him of what he first found so captivating about her, the gentle but powerful presence that had drawn him in when he was on the verge of giving up hope. One evening, after an especially busy day, they closed the cafe late. Claire sat down at one of the corner tables. The overhead lights dimmed, creating an intimate hush. Andrew joined her, pouring them both glasses of cool water. She took a sip and whispered that she felt both tired and incredibly alive, a mixture that left her buzzing. Andrew admitted he felt the same, recounting how fulfilling it was to watch customers leave with smiles, to overhear them chatting about the art, to see local musicians get a platform they otherwise might not have had. Every ounce of exhaustion was laced with gratitude. They stayed there, in that quiet moment, letting the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of city traffic serve as a lullaby. Andrew found himself thinking about how once he had dreaded the future, certain that financial doom was inevitable. Now, looking into Claire's eyes, feeling the gentle press of her hand against his, he understood that the real wealth in his life wasn't in dollars or accounts. It was in the shared dreams and the everyday triumphs, small and large, that had carried them here. The reflection of the cafe in her eyes was testament to how far they'd traveled from those days of lingering heartbreak and uncertainty. He gently brushed aside a stray hair from her face, and they both smiled, each silently acknowledging the journey that had shaped them into the team they were. If someone had told him back then that losing his job and nearly going broke would eventually lead to a new career, a loving partner, and a vibrant community space, he might have thought it was a fairy tale. But real life, he realized, sometimes offered up the most extraordinary narratives if you just kept moving forward with heart and determination. A key turned in the lock and the final overhead light went out. They made their way home under the glow of street lamps, hearts brimming with warmth at the thought of tomorrow. A new day in the place they had built from the ground up, fueled by the lessons learned from adversity and the surprising power of a single, hopeful conversation between two strangers in a modest cafe on a fateful night not so long ago. They had been in operation for about 6 months when a surprising development occurred. A regional news outlet picked up on their story, featuring Canvas and Roast as a must-visit spot for art lovers and coffee enthusiasts. The article highlighted how the owners had once been facing financial hardships, yet managed to create a thriving community hub. Within days of the article's publication, they saw an uptick in visitors, including out-of-towners who'd read about their unique blend of culture and comfort. Andrew and Claire scrambled to adjust their supply orders, scheduling staff in a way that could accommodate the new flow of patrons. It was exhilarating and a bit overwhelming, but they approached it as a team, each taking on roles that suited their strengths. The cafe's success opened doors for further collaborations. A local crafts market wanted to use their space once a month for pop-up shops featuring handmade goods. A small publisher of poetry chapbooks inquired about hosting live readings. Even neighboring businesses saw how Canvas and Roast drew foot traffic, leading to informal partnerships where they cross-promoted each other's products or events. Claire found herself painting less during cafe hours because the place rarely lulled now, but she still maintained her creative edge, working on commissions or personal projects in the evening or early morning. Andrew juggled the day-to-day cafe operations, ongoing marketing work with the cultural center, and the budding book project. A delicate balance made possible only through meticulous scheduling and unwavering passion. Meanwhile, they continued to evolve personally. Andrew refined his budgeting strategies further now that the cafe had become a significant financial responsibility. He made sure to keep separate accounts for business and personal expenses, an important lesson he had learned in earlier days. Claire found the hustle invigorating, but made it a point to step back occasionally, taking a day or two to recharge. They both agreed that if Canvas and Roast was going to be a long-term success, it needed to grow sustainably. That meant not burning out and not letting the work overshadow the love that had sparked everything in the first place. Their relationship found new layers of closeness. Sharing a business, a home, and creative goals tested their communication skills, forcing them to be open, honest, and quick to resolve tensions. They discovered how to lean on each other without losing their individual identities. Some nights, Claire would lose herself in a painting while Andrew typed away at marketing proposals, each of them engrossed in their own zone, but content simply by the other's presence. On weekends, if the cafe schedule allowed, they would slip out of town for a day trip, exploring quiet countryside settings or small neighboring cities, feeding their souls with fresh scenes and slow conversations. Around this time, Andrew received a draft contract from the editor who wanted to publish his collection of personal finance and life lessons. The terms were fair, and the plan was to release it as a short book, physically and digitally. Excitement coursed through him, though he wondered how he'd find the time to finalize the manuscript. Once again, Claire stepped in with her unwavering support. She offered to assist with editing, giving feedback on which parts resonated most. Some nights, after they closed the cafe, they'd sit at the back table, the hum of refrigerators and the faint smell of coffee beans around them, discussing how to structure each chapter or refine a particular anecdote. Occasionally, Andrew felt a pang of vulnerability. The book included intimate reflections on moments of despair, including the fear of eviction and the feelings of inadequacy that haunted him before he met Claire. Sharing such raw personal details with a wider audience was daunting. But every time doubt surfaced, Claire would gently remind him that his willingness to be vulnerable was exactly what made the story resonate. He thought of the messages he'd received from strangers who found hope in his posts and realized that by offering his experiences honestly, he might continue to encourage those who felt trapped by financial or emotional burdens. As the manuscript took shape, Andrew began to incorporate more of the romantic journey he and Claire had experienced. He detailed how love can be a catalyst, a source of emotional stability that allows a person to take risks, face challenges, and keep going when the odds seem stacked. Yet he made it clear it wasn't about finding someone else to solve your problems. It was about how authentic partnership can fortify your resolve to solve them yourself. He expressed that while finances can strain relationships, they can also bring people closer when both partners choose to collaborate, communicate, and maintain shared goals. In the final chapters, he circled back to Canvas and Roast as a living example of how financial self-awareness, community building, and love can blend into a project that benefits not just a couple, but a whole neighborhood. He wrote about nights spent painting signs, debugging the cafe's point-of-sale system, or practicing new coffee recipes, all against the backdrop of emotional ups and downs. Each anecdote underscored a lesson: perseverance, humility, compassion, openness to unexpected paths. When he finally submitted the completed manuscript to the editor, Andrew let out a deep sigh, as though he'd been holding his breath for months. Claire surprised him that evening by arranging a small celebratory gathering at home, inviting just a few close friends. They toasted with modest glasses of wine, sharing stories of how far Andrew and Claire had come since the days when even affording a bottle of wine felt like a luxury. The moment felt both intimate and monumental, a tangible step into the next phase of their shared life. Meanwhile, the cafe continued to flourish. Their monthly schedule filled up with local music nights, mini art festivals, and rotating galleries that kept customers excited to return. Mark's sculptures made a reappearance, as did works from emerging talents, each display adding new energy to the space. There were days so busy that Andrew and Claire barely found time to eat, let alone sit together. Yet every evening, once the doors closed, they'd regroup, recounting the day's highlights and challenges, leaning on each other's strengths to keep pushing forward. A year into the cafe's life, they decided to host an anniversary celebration. Invitations went out across social media, local bulletin boards, and word-of-mouth networks. They prepared special drinks, curated a collection of the most beloved artwork from the past year, and organized a lineup of performances that showcased the diversity of talents they'd come to cherish. The night of the anniversary, Canvas and Roast buzzed with guests from all walks of life. Artists, regular customers, folks from the cultural center, and even a few travelers who happened to be in the city. At one point, Andrew stood by the counter, watching the swirl of people under the warm lights. The space was filled with laughter, the murmur of conversations, the tinkling of guitar chords from a stage corner. He spotted Claire speaking animatedly with a small group, describing the stories behind the paintings on display. Her eyes sparkled with the same light he'd seen when she first shared her dream of hosting a gallery show. He remembered how uncertain they'd been, how each of them carried financial burdens that seemed insurmountable. Now, in this bright, art-filled cafe, he felt every struggle had been worth it. Toward the end of the evening, Claire took the stage for a few words of thanks. She expressed gratitude not just for the support of the community, but also for Andrew's unwavering dedication. She recounted, with a playful grin, how he was once the nervous guy who approached her in a different cafe altogether, unsure of his future. Yet here he was, co-owner of a thriving space that nurtured both creativity and connection. Andrew, leaning against the counter, felt a surge of emotion. Applause rang out, and when Claire descended from the stage, she walked straight over to him. In front of everyone, she lightly placed her arms around his neck, and they shared a soft, unhurried kiss that spoke of everything they'd been through. A few weeks later, Andrew's book was published, titled Love, Art, and the Balance Sheet, A Personal Journey to Financial and Emotional Freedom. It received a modest but heartfelt reception. Friends and cafe regulars bought copies, praising the blend of storytelling and practical advice. Some local book clubs even chose it as a monthly read, inviting Andrew for Q&A sessions. He felt both proud and slightly embarrassed by the attention, but mostly he was glad if his words could guide someone else toward hope. With the book out in the world, the cafe stable, and their relationship stronger than ever, they arrived at a new chapter of possibility. They began contemplating expansions, perhaps a second branch in another neighborhood, or a traveling version of Canvas and Roast that could pop up in different cities. Or maybe they'd focus more on an online platform, connecting with artists and coffee enthusiasts who couldn't visit in person. The options felt endless, yet they resolved not to rush. Every lesson they'd learned told them the best growth happened step by careful step. In quieter moments, they often reflected on the core principles that had guided them from those first uncertain days to their current life. They believed in genuine communication, whether it was about finances, fears, or hopes. They valued community, seeing how mutual support could transform individual dreams into shared realities. And above all, they cherished love as both a comfort and a catalyst, pushing them to strive for better while providing the safety net that every dreamer needs. Perhaps the most reassuring thought was that they still felt the wonder of it all. Even though the cafe had become a normal part of their daily routine, they never lost sight of the fact that it was born from a series of risks, leaps of faith, and heartfelt connections. Each morning, when Andrew turned the key to open the door, inhaling the comforting scent of coffee grounds, he felt a rush of gratitude. Each new piece of art that Claire helped hang reminded her that creativity was boundless if nourished by the right environment. Together, they embraced the quiet truth that a life shaped by passion, mutual respect, and financial mindfulness could be both beautiful and sustainable. And so they carried on, welcoming each new day, each fresh challenge, and each unexpected joy with open arms. The sense of romance that had blossomed between them was no longer the fragile spark of new love, but rather a deep, enduring flame fed by shared experiences and an unwavering commitment to grow. Side by side, they walked the path they had once only dreamed of, confident that even if the road curved or the winds of fortune shifted, they had everything they needed within each other and within themselves to keep writing this ever-evolving story of hope, love, and perseverance.